Hello and welcome to another One Big Question. And today, Dave and I are going to try and answer the one big question, which is integration the same as delivery? So here we are, Modern Software Engineering channel. We've got one big question. We've also got one big sponsor, and I'll hand over to Dave to do that. But before that, hit like and subscribe if you'd like more of this content.
Thanks, Kevlin. Hi, everyone. So this episode is sponsored by Octopus. Octopus make it easy to deliver software to Kubernetes, multi-cloud, on-premises infrastructure, and anywhere else, really. They automate the release, deployment, and operations for your software and AI workloads with a tool that can handle continuous delivery at scale. Octopus also have tools that can help you to achieve regulatory compliance and that improve the security of your systems. So very relevant to today's question. So do check out their links in the description below. And if you do, tell them that you came from here and register your support. Thanks to Octopus for supporting the channel. Let's get to the question.
Yeah, that question, is integration the same as delivery? Now, obviously, we're going to touch on the silent word that people are already hearing before those two words, continuous. But let's just start, I think, with the basics. Integration and delivery. Are these synonyms?
I think that they are not, but they're extremely close together in my thinking in the context of the way in which we like to structure our work. As a little aside, when Jez and I were writing the continuous delivery book, I wanted to call it continuous integration. Yeah, but there was a book called Continuous Integration by Paul Duval, which was very good. And so I couldn't. The title had been taken. And I was frustrated a little bit until in conversation with a few people, we came to realize that continuous delivery was the right answer. It was the right description of what it was that we wanted to describe. So I think that they are, in my mind, they're the same thing. So one of the things that I get slightly, mildly, annoyingly irritated by is the term CI/CD, because in my mind, you can't do continuous delivery without continuous integration. They are part of the same thing. They are part of working in the same way. So it's a bit like saying pin number. It's,
Yeah.
we're referring to the idea twice. So I find it mildly irritating. But I think that there's a distinction. So in terms of delivery, we might integrate some changes into the software, and we might even make those changes, deliver those changes into production and not release them to people. So is that different from delivery? There's kind of a confusion if we add releasable in as well as integration and delivery.
Yeah, I think you're right to, and it's one of the reasons as I used it a few minutes ago, and I used it cautiously because one, I know I'm speaking to you, but also it's the CI/CD thing. Is like, it always strikes me as, it's one of those terms that's kind of evolved to try and make sure everybody's coming along and has kind of got some read on it, because there are these distinctions. But there is this kind of idea of like, you're not going to be able to continuously anything if you can't continuously the thing that is necessary to get there. The integration comes before the delivery, unless we've got some kind of rapid, unless we decide that we're going to absolutely defer integration until runtime and cross our fingers. But we're going to say that's probably outside the scope. But even without the continuous, we can actually, there is a boundary. So although you may conceive of them as being like part and parcel of the same idea, exactly as you say, there is possibility of I can integrate the software, but I don't have users using it yet. It's not available for them. In fact, we can see up here, I've got a fully integrated Lego model of a lunar lander. At this point, if I were to say, Dave, I'm going to deliver this to you, that's a separate activity. And it's clearly in the real world, it's an activity that takes logistical effort and time. But we can see that it's been fully assembled and it's fully integrated. It's kind of ready to go, but it is not gone. It's not usable by anybody else. Nobody else gets to play with it at this point.
So I think that what we're both saying is that integration is kind of a technical activity that is a prerequisite to the delivery of something to some other people to take advantage of, right? So they are distinct in that sense, certainly.
Yes, and I think that's a very good way of looking at it. It's a technically focused activity. In other words, from a point of view of an organization that is doing software delivery, it might be a technical necessity, but it's not the kind of thing that you can promote externally. In other words, if I'm talking to a client and saying, "Hey, guess what? We do continuous integration." Honestly, I might as well be talking about how I line up my curly brackets. It's going to make no difference to their end user experience. As a customer, that
absolutely
doesn't, I mean, it might give them some warm fuzzies if they know what's involved, but that's not going to make a difference to their experience. Whereas if we say delivery, now we're talking their language. So I like that distinction. CI is much more a technically focused prerequisite. CD is much more outward. It acknowledges, says, yep, we complete the deal, and it has business meaning, whereas CI doesn't really have business meaning.
And none of that is to devalue the impact and value of CI to enable our ability to continuously deliver. I don't believe that there is any alternative to continuous integration as a foundation on which the ability to continuously deliver is built.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think it's one of the successes of continuous delivery as a concept, I think, is that the words make sense and they are friendly to non-technical people. The concepts are more amenable to non-technical people. I think if I'm honest, I think that a large proportion of the stuff that I talk about as continuous delivery is really extreme programming in a more friendly wrapper. And so extreme programming, is, the engineering practices that we go through in order to be able to deliver software more effectively. Better software faster is the tagline that I tend to use. And I think continuous delivery is that. I think that we took some of the ideas to their logical conclusions from from extreme programming, but philosophically they are parent and sibling parent and offspring in my mind. And so I think, but continuous delivery has the advantage in marketing terms that everybody wants to be able to continuously deliver valuable software to their users. Everybody would like that, really. Whereas, you say extreme programming or continuous integration and people go, what?
Yeah.
Until you know what they mean, you don't understand what the value is.
Yeah. So for continuous integration, I have to then describe, I have to then say, here's how software is developed, and then things are integrated and so on. In other words, I have to give you a technical breakdown. Well, I show you a bit of the sausage factory, and I require more from you than if I am just simply talking in business terms. But as exactly as you say, these are engineering practices that form this basis, and I think notably as a kind of a prerequisite or kind of a fundamental thing, and why you sort of talked about it being these are together in your mind, there is that idea is that we've been around long enough to know what this looks like when it's not done like this. And I'm sure we could maybe, and in fact this is maybe we should have one big ramble as an offshoot, one day just get all the modern software engineering channel, horror stories. And I remember visiting a company in West London a number of years ago, and they were talking about the integration day they did every month. And they said, it was painful, and they said, well, now we do it every few weeks, and it takes about 3 hours. But rather, they started the conversation there. It takes a few hours to, and go, good grief, whoa, wow. And they said, oh, no, you have no idea how bad it used to be. It used to take a day or two, and we used to do this, we used to keep putting it off. And just the whole act of integration was almost an act of disintegration in terms of team cohesion or a sense of progress. Everybody feels individually they were progressing, but they hadn't really checked in with their colleagues. And then suddenly you have this kind of like derailing effect.
I had a client who decomposed their system into several small teams after working for years as a monolith, and all of the teams had decided that they were getting in the way of each other. They kept tripping over each other in the repository, so they'd each taken a cut of their own cut of the repository and were working independently on it. And it had been 18 months since they'd last been able to compile the system.
Oh, okay. That beats my we haven't compiled since, there's a kind of like a big banner, however many days since the workplace accident, however many days since this code last compiled. And I have a couple of horror stories, but I'm going to say they pale into insignificance against 18 months.
It was kind of the most anti-Conway move that you've ever seen in your life.
Yeah, and that is an important idea. So, in other words, this idea of even before we hit the continuous, even before we hit the questions of rate, that idea of integration for many people has sat outside their, I don't know, zone of care when it comes to building. And one of the things that XP did is sort of not only bring it inside, but say, you know what, how often do you compile? Maybe the integration of the system as a whole should be done at a comparable scale of time. And that was like radical. That challenged a lot of people. I mean, we're not even talking about putting stuff on people's desktops or their phones or whatever. It was a case of let's do this far more frequently. Which I guess brings us to the interesting choice of the word continuous, because it's an interesting one. There is this kind of question, is it truly continuous? Because obviously, when we talk about other things, and I often describe this to folks, particularly in the Java space, for example, where incremental compilation has been part of IDEs. Since the beginning, almost the beginning of Java time. And the terminology of incremental compilation, and once we've got background compilation, it's always being assessed. It's always, is this syntactically valid? Does this make any kind of sense from the point of view of the compiler? And that's always a background task that's constantly running. And I sometimes joke to people, it's like, well, that was kind of the language of the 90s. And perhaps if we had this technology become more popular later, we would have probably ended up calling it continuous compilation. Because those increments are only a few seconds apart. Whereas now we're talking with continuous integration. In fact, one of the things that Kent says in here under the section continuous integration is he actually says it's not continuous, pretty much. He basically says, it's kind of like he was looking at it every couple of hours, and he says that instantaneous stuff would actually be, well, Google Docs had not yet been invented, but it would be a little bit like that. That might be a bit discombobulating, and we now live in a different world. We'd say things differently. But there was an idea that even when continuous was used, it was not intentionally truly continuous.
Yeah, no, certainly not in a scientifically rigorous sense.
Yeah, it's discrete.
It's discrete. Yeah, and I'm okay with that. I don't think I'd want it to be truly continuous in that sense. So I think I want to choose the moments when I'm ready to go.
Yeah.
But I want the gap between those moments to be small.
Yeah, I think there's I think that that distinction that you're drawing there is, I think it's an important one. It's very much like anything that we are committing, anything that we are writing, anything that we are generating, is there's a notion that we are doing some work, and is this ready? And perhaps what needs adjusting is our notion of readiness. If I'm in the middle of something and I think, you know what, this is not ready for whatever reason, that's fine. What I want to do is bring the readiness, I want to bring that interval down, but there's a conscious decision of like, this should be decent enough for what we're doing. We've made a very discrete change, so to speak. But it's ready at this point. It's not everything, but I would like this to be part of the story that everybody else in the system perceives. All the other developers should see this as well. Yes. Which I think kind of gets that, in other words, the integrated view of the system, the code base as a whole, that we have a unified view, that when we look to the version control system, we see a single concept, and that concept is never more than a few hours at most out of sync with what everybody is thinking and doing. And so that, for me, integration, although we approach it from a technical point of view, I think there's a psychological element here. In other words, it's just like, as a team, we are working on a single source of truth, effectively. This is what we think. And occasionally there's a little bit of a dissonance here and there. But I think this also takes us to another point, and you talked about a team not compiling for 18 months. It takes us to another point, which I think is a challenge and is a contradiction to how many people would work, whether they focus more modestly on CI or more ambitiously on CD, is version control strategy. and branch-based development. Let's talk about that for a moment.
Oh, now you're getting into the contentious stuff.
Yeah. C stands for contentious. You thought it stood for continuous. Oh no, it stands for contentious. Because that's the thing. Because I said, as a psychological whole, and again, going right back to the origins of CI as a term, and going through your book, there's that idea of like, it's not unstated, but it's either implied or understated. So much so that many people, I think, miss it. Is that we as a team, we are working on one vision of the software. That means there is one version of the code base. Yeah. As opposed to, I'm continuously integrating. Yeah, but you're off on a branch that has never seen the main line for, they're at best distant relatives. But you feel you're doing something I'm checking it. I'm committing stuff every few minutes. But that's not the same, is it?
Before we go down the branching rabbit hole, I just want to riff on the integration bit again. I think that there's a really, really common misconception that continuous integration means using a tool like Jenkins or Bamboo or TeamCity or Circle CI or whatever else. And it's nothing to do with that. It's about continuously integrating. It's about integrating our changes together. So if you are working on a branch alone or with a small subset of other people, you're not continuously integrating because you're not integrating your changes with everybody else all of the time. Even if you're pulling all of the time from that branch that's not changing. If you and I are working on discrete copies of the code and we are not merging them together fairly frequently, at least in terms of definitional terms, at least once per day, we are not practicing continuous integration. We are not learning from each other whether our changes work together and complement one another. And that's the real thing, because it seems to me that there's something deep about it's the only way in which we can evaluate the truth of the system.
Yeah.
By saying, here's a stable point. These are all the bits that should work together. Do they?
Yeah. And I think people,
and that seems important.
Yeah, I think perhaps if we draw, because in practice what we end up with heavy branching strategies, or even not heavy branching strategies, is continuous fragmentation.
Yes.
What people are actually practicing is continuous commit. Yes. But they are not practicing integration. Integration is a word with relatively few alternative interpretations. It's quite unambiguous. Yes. It's an integrated thing, and that goes back to this idea of, as you say, there's a learning. How do we know as a whole we are developing the same system in the same way? So this kind of extends, it does extend the reach from the purely technical into the social and the psychological. Are we as a team developing a thing, or are we wandering off on our own little sweet paths? Yes. And that's the problem, is I think that then sits very nicely with what you said before about CI being a technical prerequisite to CD, because you're not going to deliver all these fragmented views of reality.
Yes.
And that's the way we can look at it, is that, every single branch is effectively an alternative reality.
Yes.
That's not what from a customer point of view, they want one system. They want a delivery of a thing. They don't want a delivery of like, here's a bunch of sketches of alternative universes. They want a whole. Where does that whole come from? Well, it comes out of a process of integration. And if the integration is actually fragmentation, then it's not integration by definition. So many people are practicing CF.
I definitely, I think that's true. I have a thought along those lines that I think you, as a physics nerd like me, will enjoy. So I think that continuous integration is solving a really seriously deep problem in information terms. And it's so deep that I think it's analogous to quantum mechanics, quantum theory. So, if you think of two pieces of information, copies of the same piece of information that are changing independently of one another, as they would if they were on separate branches, then what's the truth? There is no way to tell until you collapse the wave function and bring them back together and figure out what the combined truth is and make some decisions. It's the only way to tell the truth. Yeah. And so you are, as long as they are separate, we are in a superposition of state. Yeah. In a very similarly analogous way to a quantum system. So this is quite deep and difficult stuff to reason about. And continuous integration comes with some baggage that makes it a little bit annoying sometimes. But if we adopt it, it makes everything simpler. It stops us having to cope with that ridiculous, impossible to reason about state of the system.
Yeah.
There's a lovely quote. I don't think it's in Kent's book. I think it's from the C2 wiki, which was kind of the team's notes before they wrote the book, I think. But it says continuous integration is based on the assumption that there's only one interesting version of the software, the current one.
Yeah.
So we have to regularly establish a snapshot of what the current state of the system is, and that means we have to pull all of these changes together and then evaluate them. I liked that. That resonated with me.
That's a really good way of looking at it. And actually on that kind of deep note, it's kind of like, that gives us the idea that that continuous integration is basically wave function collapse. It
Yes.
gives us the classical mechanics against which we can understand and therefore deliver. So yeah, I don't think we can get much deeper than that. And that feels like a really good note to end on.
Very good. Thank you very much, everybody, for watching. If you enjoy our stuff, please do like and subscribe, as Kevlin said at the start. And if you really like it, consider supporting our channel by joining our Patreon community. It's through the support of our Patreons in part that we're able to continue doing this kind of thing. So thank you.